My panel ready? You're kind of a distance from me. Are you all there? Dennis, are you at the end there? Okay, you can just wave from time to time. So I want to welcome everyone here. It's nice to see a big crowd here in the auditorium. And for those of you who are watching live from wherever you are, hi, wherever you are. Too bad you couldn't come here, but at least you're watching live. And my understanding is also, Carlos, right, that we're gonna come up with a shorter version. It's not saying that our current students who need to be inspired by the luminaries who came before them don't have attention spans, and that they couldn't watch the whole hour or whatever it turns out to be. But since they don't have attention spans, we'll get it down to what, a minute and a half? No, 2 minutes. Mobile friendly, which is what, like Twitter or something like that. Okay, well, so I already told the panel that they're going to introduce themselves, and you have the nice little write-ups, and we don't want to replicate that. But the main reason I want, before I start interviewing them, and here's the thing, I'm going to ask them some questions so we learn a little bit more about them and about their time at Northwestern University, and of course their time subsequent to graduation. We're also going to try to embarrass them a little bit. So Dennis, you're going to see that we have pictures of all of you when you were undergrads. But you can't turn your head. No. So well, you can say something about it. Oh my God, you looked.
Dennis.
You looked. Oh, that circle. Oh, that's cute. It's still cute. So I'm going to open it up, and please, there's plenty of seats. Make yourself at home here as you come in. Yeah. So let me start. This is my opening question for each of you, and it's not surprising, right? Because usually what happens is someone asks the panel to talk a little bit about his or her life and everything. But we talk now about taking a Northwestern direction. And you guys know that, right? I mean, if you watch on TV when they do the commercials, take a Northwestern direction, right? And if you've been over to the Siegel Visitor Center, and if you haven't, it's a 3-minute walk from here. You should definitely check it out. So all the videos are about taking a Northwestern direction. That Northwestern means something. It means Midwestern values. It means that it's not just one part of your brain, it's both part of your brain. So we talk to people about taking a Northwestern direction, and with this year we should have about 35,000 prospective freshmen who want to take a Northwestern direction. Unfortunately, we only have spots for 2,000 of them. So my opening question, just in a way so that the audience gets to know each of you, tell me about the Northwestern direction. Not what happened subsequent, or even what happened while you were here, but how did you end up here in Evanston? And I'm going to start with you, Dennis, and each of you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll put up the embarrassing, maybe even actually nice pictures behind you. So starting with you, Dennis. I know your voice is coming back. You introduced me yesterday at Deering Meadow, and you struggled through it, but it sounds like you're up to what, like at least 11%, which is the way my shoulder is. So between the two of us, we're in great shape. So Dennis, please. Tell us about your Northwestern direction.
Sure, thanks, Morty. It's coming back, but you may remember the movie Spinal Tap, where they were determined to amplify up to 11.
I can translate that. Who remembers the movie Spinal Tap? One of the funniest movies ever. And Stonehenge came down. Remember, they got the size wrong. It was supposed to be this little thing, and they almost stepped on it. It's a classic.
It's a classic.
After we beat Iowa tomorrow, you can rent it on Netflix and watch it. So, Dennis, what does Spinal Tap have to do with what we're here about?
Well, I wish I had that so I could turn up to 11 right now.
Oh, turn the volume.
Yeah. So it's first a pleasure to be here. Thank you. And my Northwestern direction started out of my high school experience, and I was raised here in Chicago, went to a Chicago school, and my background was one of being interested in both math and science, and I wanted to go to a good engineering school, and Northwestern was my first choice. It was a school that I really felt would provide me the kind of background and education I needed to be able to continue that analytical background that I wanted to pursue. And the primary thing it did is to give me the ability to think in an organized and an analytical way. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Christy?
Well, for me, I think from freshman year of high school, basically, I knew that...
That circle is you? Oh, the bottom circle. I was just looking at the top circle. I was thinking, because we talk about transforming people, at Northwestern. But that would be one heck of a transformation.
Well, what you're basically seeing here, Morty, is that Mike Wilbon and I have been attached at the hip since the fall of '76.
Wait a second. That's Wilbon?
Both of those are me and Wilbon. And the one is the Daily Northwestern, which would have been, well, we were class of '80, so '79. And there's others, I don't know if Mark Davis and other people are here, but they're in the picture. And then that's the Seoul Olympics opening ceremonies in 1988.
Keep these down, please. They are so distracting.
Oh, no, there's more.
Oh, there's more.
Oh my God.
I'm not turning around anymore.
Well, it's all me this time, so anyway. So at freshman year of high school, I just really knew I wanted to be in journalism. The advisor for the high school paper was a great English teacher. This is growing up in the suburbs of Toledo, Ottawa Hills High School. And so really from age 14 onward, I just knew what I wanted to do. And it's a little crazy that would be the case. And Mike and we all mentor so many people, and you tell them it's okay to not know. Well, I was, and I think you were too, Mike, the opposite. I knew. And so as I started, Morty, like sophomore, junior year of high school, starting to look at colleges, and looking at those, remember those thick college guides that you'd leaf through and memorize? And I started to check on journalism schools, and it came up every time. Northwestern, the best journalism school in the country, the Medill School of Journalism. And so it was a no-brainer for me. I applied early decision to Northwestern. I got in, and I love what I'm doing today in journalism and media. I love my life today, probably more than the day I first started at the Miami Herald after my 4.5 years here, getting my undergrad and my master's degree. So for me, Northwestern, we talk about, and you've done this, Morty, with our school, raised us to a level of the Ivy Leagues, where we literally are ahead of, 2 or 3 Ivy Leagues in the latest rankings, the U.S. News and World Report rankings. And so many of us feel that way. Well, we knew as journalists that we were going to Northwestern. Northwestern was Harvard in terms of journalism. It was the best in the country, and it still is. And Mike and I are both honored, of course, to be a part of Medill even now. But it was absolutely a no-brainer and best decision I ever made.
Mike?
Our stories are not, they're not dissimilar. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and so, I didn't have to wonder, I didn't have to inquire, I didn't have to go to any great lengths to find out what Northwestern was all about. I had family members who had gone to Northwestern as far back as the 1940s. And I knew with great certainty that I wanted to be a journalist. And I went to a small Jesuit school here, St. Ignatius. For those of you who might know of St. Ignatius, I knew after I took a journalism class my sophomore year, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to one school. I wanted to go to Medill. That's it. Can't get any more simple or straightforward than that. I geared everything in my life, my sophomore, junior, and senior years of high school, to be accepted by and to attend Medill and Northwestern. And so, it's always difficult when you're talking to students who don't really know what they're doing, when you were one of those who knew what you wanted to do. And it was vocation and avocation, and has been that from high school. So it was called early notification back then, by the way, Christine. It wasn't early decision. Early notification was what it was called, and I did it too. And so I knew I wanted to be here, knew I wanted to be in Medill, and it was a real simple formula once I got accepted to say yes, and like the two of us seemed like we've never left campus, and it's been a long time, as you can see, particularly by the afro that I had in those pictures.
Meanwhile, now look at your
I'll use this.
You might want to bring that back here, Mike. Pretty fetching there. Doug.
So I grew up in the area. I grew up in Northbrook. I went to the best high school in CSL North, Glenbrook North High School. Those of you who may have gone to New Trier or Evanston would definitely agree with me and understand that as a fact. So I was raised with those Midwestern values. My parents raised me with them, so I didn't need the Midwestern value. That wasn't why I came here. I came to Northwestern I was good at math, good at science, and thought I would somehow be involved in some kind of engineering or technology, or maybe go into law and be a patent lawyer like my dad. So that was kind of what I had in mind when I looked at schools. And so U of I was a natural one. It was one of the best engineering schools in the country at the time. And Northwestern was also very strong in that. I think the reason I came to Northwestern was I had a sense that even though that was what I was good at, and that's what I was probably interested in, would end up doing long term, I felt like Northwestern, which my sister was at, would give me exposure to some other stuff that I didn't really like or wasn't that interested in terms of liberal arts. But I had the sense that I should probably develop that kind of interest because I thought that it would be valuable. And I came in as an electrical engineer, and then shortly after I realized, hey, if I'm going to develop this interest and get good at something, nobody's going to pay me to be an English lit person some point in the future, unless I go into academics. And I had that realization while I was here, and I eventually did go into technology, but Northwestern was just a great place for me to almost go the other direction.
Fantastic. Chanel?
So my name is Chanel Jones. I feel I'm honored to even be sitting at this table. So I graduated in 2000 from Medill. I am from Wichita, Kansas, and we share a common thread here in that when I was in 5th grade, career day, there was a yellow sheet of construction paper. My mom still has it. I wanted to be a news lady, so I had this little brown circle with helmet hair, hoop earrings, and a little box on my head, and my hands like this. So in 5th grade, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It was just a matter of how I was going to make that happen, right? So I'm an AKA, my mom's an AKA, she calls some of her sorority sisters, and I got internships, and I started my sophomore year in high school. Every summer, I found myself in a newsroom. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I was running somebody's teleprompter, messing somebody up. And then I was valedictorian, I had good grades, but I wanted to go someplace with a great journalism program, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. And my mom said, you know what, when you visit Northwestern's campus, she goes, you'll know. If it's for you, it'll click. You'll just get on campus and something will say, you know what, this is the place. And that's exactly, ooh, look. Oh, gosh. Woo! I don't even want to look. In fact, though, I will tell you this. The last time I was in this room, or one of the last times, I was tap dancing. I remember I was in this group on campus. Anyway, long story short, that's always dangerous when people say that. But anyway, so when I got to Northwestern, I think the important thing I feel like I had the talent, I just didn't know what to do with it, right? So it was like a chisel, and I'm working on this masterpiece that I'm still trying to, create today. But whether it's, hey, you kind of have a twang, let's take this class over here and work on that thick twang. Hey, you know what, let's work on your storytelling. Have you ever heard of the pregnant eye? You personalize it, and then you put the story in the middle, and you put, hey, have you ever done this? You know what, you should go to Topeka for your teaching television and go intern there, and they'll put you on the air. So all of these little seeds of information. There's a man who probably, I don't know if he knows, I saw him come in. There was one time where I called him out. I used to watch him on TV, Derek, and he doesn't even remember this. I had a VHS tape. Yep, he let me come, and I popped it in, and he was tough on me. Ooh, you should do this. That's a good story. You should do that. And I remember taking notes, and I remember getting in my car going, oh, this is never going to work for me. But I took everything he said, and I went back and changed my stand-up. I did this, I did that. And now 15 years later, I still have a long way to go, but I'm at the Today Show, so I'm not doing too badly. But it started here. I mean, Northwestern, talk about direction. This is what helped me maximize that potential. The minds that you have here, the professors, the friends that you make, it's just this hot pot of wisdom that I wouldn't be where I am without it.
So, yeah. I'm inspired. I don't know about you. I'm inspired. So, several of you talked a little bit about once you got here, you weren't sure what you wanted to do. Some of you were pretty sure and you had your dreams. So I want to hear a little bit more about that, because, this is a generation, and I spent a lot of time with the entering students, and some of them think they know what they want, but it's really what their parents want for them, and some of them, just feel like they're clueless. So, talk a little bit about how you evolved while you were here. And we'll stick with you first, Chanel, a little bit. You came here, you knew why, you knew Medill, and you had some, I mean, did you always, was that your dream? You're going to be on a Today Show?
Well,
How did you organize your life here, inside and outside the classroom, to increase the probability that those dreams would be realized?
I just finished a panel with some students over in Medill, over in Fisk, and I was looking at them. A lot of them were seniors, and I told them, I said, look, I wish I could talk to my whatever-year-old self at the time. I remember, college was fun. I was tapping on this stage and skiing and party walking and everything else that we do. But I remember I had a little bit of anxiety. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to get there. And I remember my freshman year, or my senior year, I was so nervous about how I was going to make it happen. And the thing about college is, in addition to the career track, we have who we are as human beings, right? What kind of woman you want to be, what kind of man you want to be. And when you get to college, I remember my freshman year, I went to a great high school in Wichita, Kansas, and I remember thinking, okay, I had 4.0, and then I remember in my little quad in Park, somebody had like a 4.5, and this was Nixon's granddaughter. And this girl, her dad was a biochemist, and this girl's a physicist at 12, and I was just like, wait, I used to be smart, and then I got here. So then you quickly realize, on the chain of things, but if you use it as, okay, you know what, I'm going to learn from these people. You go to these professors who actually, any other school, they're just reading somebody else's textbook. I was like, at Northwestern, they wrote the textbook. That was always my joke. But I really tried to use this place to kind of become, I don't know, the woman that I am. But it wasn't always easy. Like, you find the activities, and it's more than just, like I said, your career. I don't know if I'm making sense. Just joining certain groups, figuring out where you belong, as a young black woman, where you fit. I'm flipping through the TV stations, and I didn't see a lot of faces that looked like my own. There was Allison Payne at WGN, so I used to just hold on to her and stare at her and go, okay, ooh, she has longer hair, I can do that. Like, you're just trying to figure it out. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So let me just follow up before I turn over to Doug. So you had mentors, you had professors, and you had friends in a support group. And so how do you, when you look back at it, was it more the life outside the classroom or more the classroom experience? You gave one example, Janelle, of learning certain kinds of skills and changing your accent that helps make you the success that you are today. Any more reflection about that? Because students are always worried about that. You don't get into Northwestern without excellence inside the classroom and out. But when they get here, they always struggle. How important is that GPA? I mean, should I put my life on hold so I can get a 3.7, or can I, really enjoy myself and be very happy with a 3.2? And reflection about that. You were saying before, I'm going to stick with you, and I'll go each of you. But you said if you could advise your then 18-year-old self. So what would you tell yourself now, given your trajectory of your career? Did you allocate? Did you make the right decisions?
It's interesting. So I met my husband. He was a prospy. I was his tour guide. Now my husband. So I know, crazy. So at the time, he was 17, and I was 19 at the time. I'm 37, I'll just tell you now. But anyway, we were just talking.
When you get older, the ages don't matter.
It doesn't matter. So I was a year ahead of him. But anyway, we were just talking about the fact that he wishes that he would have maximized Northwestern like I did, or he feels like I did. He did, he was smart, right? So he didn't necessarily have to go to class to get the A. But what he regrets is not being there to learn from the professors and not actually reading the books. Like, you were proud of yourself if you didn't read the book and you got an A. But then you look back and you're like, wait, I want to know what was in that book. He regrets not maximizing some of the things that he had. So I feel like, at least for me, and the good thing about you guys is you make sure we take classes in all different areas. Even though you want to do, I wasn't the best mathematician by any means, but we took it anyway. Or, you know what I mean? You take all sorts of different classes. And I think that was very helpful just in becoming a well-rounded human being. You know what I mean?
Perfect. So, Doug, that's a good segue to you, because you look over the bio, and what's better than Microsoft, the Facebook, a variety of different tech startups, and living all over the world and stuff. But when I met you before and I asked you about your undergraduate experience, you lit up and said, "Oh man, I was an English major. British literature changed my life." So
I don't know. Actually, I don't know if I said it changed my life. I think you're exaggerating a little. I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, like you said, what you said to me, I think, was, I wasted 4 years studying literature. Now, it was maybe somewhere in between of it. Maybe I was a little bit more excited about it, but it was because I was surprised, because and so you alluded to it in your opening remarks, and I think I asked you about, with all the focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and I'm a STEM guy, I teach econometrics, so I'm comfortable with that. But on the other hand, there are a lot of schools that seem to, have marginalized the English major and the British literature and all, and yet so tell me a little bit, when you hire in the tech field, do you reach back to that kind of a broad liberal training the way Shanil just said it, or is it, what do you think your university should do?
Well, so it was interesting. The first job that I had out of school was for a systems integration consulting firm. So, like IT, so it's technology. And I came in, there was a class of about 30 of us in our onboarding class, and 29 of them were computer science or electrical engineers, and then there was me, the English, the English lit major. And so I didn't have a lot of the skills that they had, and I had one of the welcoming lunches with the president of the division. I sat next to him, and he says, "Oh, you're the guy that we got from Northwestern who's an English lit major." So like he knew about me, and he was saying that they try to hire some people from Northwestern, from liberal arts background, like 1 or 2 every year, and what they find is that there's, in that particular field, they're slower out of the gate because it takes them, they don't have the knowledge, but then 4 years, 6 years down the road, when it shifts over to, hey, your contribution comes less from the code you write and more from, like, how well can you understand the change management, or how well do you lead or manage people? That's where they see those people start to do really, really well. So they were investing in that way. And is that because they, read a lot of really dense, impenetrable British literature? I'm not sure. I think that helped me a lot. And so when I'm doing hiring for the kinds of things at Facebook or at Microsoft, I certainly value that background. Somebody who we think can lead in that way, can understand the customers. And then what we're really working hard on at Facebook today is we're trying to connect all the people, billions of people around the world, and to develop an understanding of what that means in Taiwan versus Brazil, versus Iceland. Like having that kind of broad background is something that I think is hugely valued in practice.
I'm really thrilled to hear you say that, actually, because computer science is really important, and I'm looking at Dennis, who just gave a major gift with his wife Karen to support that, and it's really, you have to make sure that people are quantitatively literate. But you also, I like what you just said, you have to make sure that they're more culturally literate as well, and you know that from your experiences living and working in Asia. There was a study that was published in the journal Science 2.5 years ago, and it ended up in the front page of the New York Times. And the front page of the New York Times said, if you want to learn empathy, read Chekhov. And there had been a study. There are like 10 different measures of empathy. Do you really understand different people? Can you put yourself in their place? And they looked at all kinds of different things that could develop empathy. But the one that worked best, according to this scientific publication in the best journal, obviously, Science, was reading really good literature. And it was interesting. It wasn't nonfiction is important. It wasn't reading biographies of the Steve Jobs, as it were. That could help, but that didn't have an appreciable impact on enhancing empathy. And it wasn't reading really popular fiction, even though that's fun. It was reading, that's why they picked Chekhov. I mean, is there a writer other than maybe Tolstoy, who's better, could get you into the mind of characters? And I think that you probably don't know. I don't know if any of you know on this panel, but the single most ubiquitous experience for the seniors who graduated last year was taking a course in Russian literature with a brilliant faculty member named Saul Morrison. And Saul Morrison teaches fully 1 out of 3 of all the graduating seniors, which is pretty amazing because, we have 22% of them are in engineering, and some of them are in theater, and some of them are in Medill, and, but yet, the most common experience we have at Northwestern is studying Russian literature. It's not studying, Ec 10 the way it is at Harvard, or it's not studying code the way it is at Stanford. It's literature. And I can tell you, as president, I get a lot of pushback about that. People say, why is that? And my answer is that having a broad education makes you more empathetic, and making you more empathetic makes you more successful in a career and personally as well. So I love when I hear techies who appreciate literature the way you obviously do. So Mike, let me turn to it. I started with a general question for Chanel, but let me go a little bit more specific. So one of the things everyone from Northwestern loves about you, Mike Wilbon, is the way you carry the flag, the way on PTI, pardon the interruption, you have the helmet there, you and Tony like to argue and talk about this and stuff. But I know that being a professional journalism, there's always a fine line between being objective and being a rah-rah. And we see that, of course, with a number of broadcasters, some of whom are homers, in the best sense of the word, and some of whom you don't even know if it's broadcasting for the home team or the other team. So I want to hear a little bit about how you weigh those two things. And Dave Refson was at the lunch before. I think he had something else. I don't think he's here now. But let me just introduce this in a story. I think I told you this before. I was watching, I was actually at the Nebraska game 2 years ago when they had the Hail Mary in Lincoln, one of the worst moments any of us have had in recent years, at least sports-wise. And of course, I was on the field, as I always am, but I taped it. And I wasn't going to watch it because you'd flush it when you lose. But somebody said that there was an interesting thing right after Jordan Westerkamp, I think, was caught that deflection and we lost, that they cut to the studio of BTN. And there's Dave Refson, a proud alum, best-selling author, etc. And they cut to him, and he looked like he was going to throw up. I mean, it was like, he had this look, and he was like, and then all of a sudden he sees the lights on and he goes, well, that was an exciting ending, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be talking about that one for years. And then he almost started to cry. So let me tell you. So Mike, say something about that. I mean, how do you do? And you have your friends. You got Michael Jordan and Magic. I mean, how do you in other words, viewers want people to care.
They do,
right? But they want you not to pick sides. So say something about it.
Well, you're asking me why I now violate every single thing I learned at Medill over a 4-year period. And, the business has evolved, the art of storytelling, and that's what this is now. I mean, it's storytelling in whatever form it is, whether it's reality TV, whether it's 60 Minutes, whether it's E60 on ESPN. The art of storytelling has changed. The number of people and their credentials have changed dramatically. And it's changing so fast we can barely keep up. My role has changed. For 25 years as a reporter and then a columnist with the Washington Post, I didn't do any of these things I do now. Nobody knew where I went to school or who I rooted for. They might have known by the time I was a columnist. But as a reporter, my role was different. You strive to be objective. There's no objectivity, and the most overrated thing about storytelling now is objectivity. Nobody has it, which is sort of sad that you've lost the ability to attempt to be objective and remove yourself from it. But for 25 years, I didn't do any of those things. I didn't walk around with a helmet. I didn't wave the flag. I didn't say to Tony, I'm tired of you Northeastern I-95 people from New York and Boston and Philly, which I am. I didn't do any of that. And then, pardon the interruption, came on, and that show is as much a relationship show as it is a show that is featuring news and commentary. It is everybody who follows sports has somebody else they follow it with. And that is the basis of PTI, that the next Siskel and Ebert weren't going to come from commenting on films, they were going to come from the sports world. So the things I do now, I'm not a journalist really anymore. I can put on that hat. I had to put it on the other night at Wrigley Field when I'm sitting in the stands as a fan and somebody said, listen, we could use your help after the game. Hat goes back on. I think I can still find it if I need to be a journalist, but it's not what I am full time. And so that people do identify, what we found with PTI, which is really the first show of its kind, is that people, we're tribal. We are all incredibly tribal, and more so about sports. It brings out the civic pride, insanity in all of us. And people identify with that, Morty, just as you said, in a way they don't identify with anything else. And so I gave into that for the show that I was doing for PTI. And you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once you declare who you are and you declare yourself, that's it. So I have to play to it now. And it's easy because it's who I am. But if I needed to go back and work in the capacity in which I put that away and can be perfectly critical of the Cubs and Bulls and Bears and Wildcats if I need to, then I can do that. But it is storytelling. And what role are you in now as a storyteller? And this is something we did not entertain at Medill. This is all evolved, and this is something the students now are having to deal with in a way that Christine and I never did.
Fascinating. So, Christine, I want to ask you, also a very accomplished journalist, but I want to, when Chanel said that there weren't a lot of role models for her, being a black woman, and there was one and you held on to and stuff. So, being a woman in sports, I think that because of your path-breaking success, a lot of other people now see you and they have role models and everything. And you might have heard me say before, one of the most, not challenging, but different thing, I've been a president for 16 years, and the first 9 years I was at a small school, Williams College. And Williams College, like all those elite privates back east, only started admitting women in the 70s. And it's so weird for me, and my wife says the same thing, is that when we have homecomings and reunions, and you see anyone who graduated before, or you see someone who you could figure out went to college before, say, 1970 or 1971 or 2, it was always like, oh, it's a spouse, because Williams College graduated its first 4-year female class in 1975. You know what it was here? 1874. 101 years before Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Dartmouth and Amherst and Williams and all those schools discovered that they have a great product, but it's only available for half the population. This school was different. So did either of you, I guess we can go back later again to Chanel, but I asked Mike about how, as a journalist, he weighs sort of his incredible pride in his alma mater. So how are you as a journalist, how conscious are you about being a woman as a pathbreaker? And one example that I don't know how many of you know, she wrote the thing outing the Masters at Augusta Country Club for not having women. She wrote a column, I forgot what year it was, but it was one of your great award-winning columns, and they literally, integrated by gender that club, because you started that whole thing. So, was that, again, tell us about, was that as a woman? Was that as a journalist? Was that because you went to Northwestern, a place that's always welcome women? Tell me about that.
Well, Morty, it's always about Northwestern, of course, first and foremost. Number one, credit goes to Northwestern. But in this case, really, it is true. You asked a lot there, and I think Mike and I would agree, all of us at this panel would agree that the diversity at Northwestern, even before people were really focusing on diversity, was remarkable compared to our peer institutions, and that is a wonderful thing. And I think, for example, when we think of our women's lacrosse team, which has won 7 of the last 11 NCAA titles, did any of us ever think we'd have the words NCAA title and Northwestern in the same sentence? And we've won Northwestern, our women's lacrosse team that Mike and I, and maybe others here, Dennis, but Mike and I have been to many of the women's Final Four games, and cheering for lacrosse. We never would have thought that, but there we were. But there's no surprise at this success at all, because Northwestern cared about Title IX when Bo and Woody at Michigan and Ohio State didn't want women anywhere near those athletic programs. We cared in the 70s, and now look at the success, not just, of course, lacrosse, but that's the massive success on our women's side, but soccer and tennis and field hockey, beating Maryland twice last year. Those are the things. It's no surprise. The building blocks were built decades ago, Morty, to your point, and now here we are with that. Same as for me in journalism. So I walk in, and I'm here, we're both here in the fall of '76. Mike always says, don't tell them what year, but it's pretty well known. Our class, they can go to Wikipedia and on all of us, I'm sure. But So I walk in, Morty, and I go to the Daily Northwestern. I'm really nervous, and I know Mike and I both are now professors of practice at Medill. And I just spent a couple weeks ago. I talked to 100 of our young students, many women and men, all who want to be in sports journalism. And I said it's okay to be nervous because I was a nervous wreck walking into the Daily.
She wasn't nervous.
I was.
You were a big star.
No, you were the big star. Anyway, well, I was nervous, but nonetheless, you take the steps into the room, right? So the Daily Northwestern had a sports editor our freshman year, her senior year, Helene Elliott. And so the first women's byline I ever read in sports, we got the Toledo Blade, we got the Detroit Free Press. When we came up to visit grandparents in Chicago for holidays, we read the Tribune, the Sun-Times, the News American, whatever was going on here at the time. I never saw a woman's sports byline, a woman's name on a sports story until I got here and read Helene Elliott. And that, Morty, to the point you're making, I said, oh my gosh, I can do this. I'd never seen a woman's sports byline before. The only woman I had seen doing sports on television had been Phyllis George, who was Miss America in 1971. And if you saw those pictures up there, that was not going to be my career path. And Phyllis is a mentor and friend to many of us now. I love Phyllis George, but she was on the NFL Today starting in 1975. So that was it. So talk about realizing the value of role models. I always thought I'd cover politics, and I did at the Daily, and then was managing editor, and he was our star columnist in sports. And because I never really saw someone who looked like me, to your point, and that was, I was probably the biggest girl jock and the biggest sports lover. We had season tickets for Michigan, season tickets for Toledo. We had Mud Hen season tickets, Detroit Tigers season tickets. My dad was the Pied Piper with season tickets, bringing all the kids along, us and our friends. And I collected baseball cards and wrote letters to Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Fergie Jenkins and Al Kaline. And yet here I was, not sure that I could be in sports journalism. So I know Mike and I know I can speak for this guy. We vowed to be the role models that we never had. And that's, I think, how we've lived our lives. Certainly allowed mentoring here through our roles at Northwestern, which is so important to me, and I know to you as well. Anyway, and if I may for one more second, the mentoring role, every single one of you here is a mentor. And I hope we've called on you. If we haven't, we've got Bob McQuinn here, we've got Morty here. Come, we want you to come back. It's the most rewarding thing. But it all started for me by having a mentor who didn't even know she was a mentor, and Helene Elliott, reading that first byline and having that light bulb go off that, yes, there was a place in the world of sports for me.
One quick follow-up, Christine. So when you wrote that USA Today column, really forcing Augusta National Golf Club to really take it seriously about adding women, did you realize it would have the impact that it would? Did you really feel, was it more just your Medill training as a journalist, your pride in being a woman, the outrage of injustice? Just
Probably a little bit of all of it. And I actually wrote a column in '99. And I have to say a few others had written columns beforehand, but having the forum of USA Today, the biggest newspaper in the country, certainly helped. And then in 2002, I wrote another column. I wasn't even there that year, Morty, and I still had to throw my hand grenade from afar, which is what Medill definitely taught us how to do, and throw the hand grenade and run. And but unbeknownst to me, a woman is going through a national airport, of all things, in D.C., where we live, and she picks up USA Today, and her name is Martha Burke. I don't know Martha Burke, but she's the one who then fired off the letter to Hootie Johnson that triggered the whole battle. And I think as journalists, you do what you do and you let the chips fall where they may. We learned that early on at Medill. So I had if you had said, what's your hope? I would say, well, the right thing to do is have female members, but that's their job. My job is to point this out and then to move on to the next subject in sports, as I did the next week or whatever. And interestingly, if one little follow-up, our dear friend, our classmate, and also, of course, the CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, became a part of that story, because then that's where it really happened, when Billy Payne had to have a female member, which did happen in 2012, because Ginny Rometty became the CEO of IBM, as many of you may remember, and she was the first IBM CEO who was not invited to be a member of Augusta. And all heck broke loose. When I wrote that column, to Mike's point about being a journalist, when I wrote the column about Ginny and about how now they really had to do it all these years later, I did we had a little full disclosure at the bottom saying that I was on the Northwestern Board of Trustees, as was Ginny Rometty. That was essential because here I am writing about a classmate, even though it had nothing to do with that, we had to tell the readers of our interaction via Northwestern. That was very important.
Thank you. So, Dennis, just looking over the little bio here again, and you were CEO of one of America's great companies. Had a great career at Deloitte before that. You've started all these internet companies. You've been on countless public boards, private boards, and the like. But if you ask my wife Mimi what I love most about you, it's that you enjoy life. And I worry with this generation, with the focus and the relentless pursuit of success, narrowly defined. For you, on top of all that, your favorite stories are never about that. It's about, taking your grandchildren around the world. It's using, the wealth that you generated through a business career to give to philanthropy in a meaningful way. It's to pursue your crazy hobbies, the nutty submarine thing you have that jumps up and down. The guy's a character and a half. So, were you always that way? Were you one of these guys who just sort of like, okay, I'm going to focus for 50 years and get a lot of money and run companies, and then or did you always think that balance, which this generation struggles with, is so important, and why?
Very interesting question. Again, apologize for my voice. But what you see here is actually an apple and 4 oranges. Because I was here at Northwestern in 1961. If you were here in 1961, your university experience had no bearing on the experience that you guys had. Because in 1961, women lived in the South Quads, men lived in the North. The drugs meant aspirin. It was the most exciting thing that ever happened in the 4 years that I was here, is that once a year in May, there was a thing called a panty raid, where the men from the North Campus would all go to the South Campus by Allison Hall and yell, "Throw us some panties." A woman would throw a pair of panties out the window. We'd all go crazy and go back up north. Women were required to have hours. I think it was 10 o'clock, was that it? They had to be in the dorm. If they weren't in the dorm at 10 o'clock, they got points, and it was like incredibly punitive. Now, that's an apple and oranges for sure. I can remember that a part of this, and I think that the issue that you raised about my life, Morty, which I think many of our classmates will share, is, well, how do you deal with that? Yeah. And what Northwestern gave me was an idea that I needed to reinvent myself, and it allowed me to understand how to reinvent myself through the engineering courses. Math and science were math and science, but who was my role model? Ozzie and Harriet. It was this idealized view of the family. Leave it to Beaver. That was the view that you had if you grew up at that time. And I can remember, my brother's 7 years younger than I am. And I remember my wife, Karen, and I, in the late 60s, he went to the University of Illinois. And we went down, by that time we'd had our first child, we went down to visit him on a football weekend, and we went to his fraternity house. And they were all sitting around. I was like, I felt like, Gomer Pyle, golly, what is this? They were smoking dope. There was all these things going on. I had no idea that even existed. So if you grew up in that kind of an environment, you had a completely different social experience. Now, what Northwestern did for me, though, is that throughout my career, because of my interests today are pretty much the same as they were when I was 20. I like cars, I like mechanical things, I like all sorts of gadgets. And it allowed me to understand, as things progressed and developed, I needed to stay with it. So my background's in computers, I'm still very technically competent in that. And it's been since that time. But it was the training that I got that allowed me to understand that one simple concept. You've got to constantly reinvent yourself and deal with the new world. And that was the most important thing to me.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So Chanel, we're on the lightning round now. So it's like PTI, Mike, and it's coming down here. I only have a couple more seconds and stuff. So I want, there's two things I want to hear from each of you, but one line on each. The first one is sort of what we touched on. What's the one bit of advice you would give? Because there are a lot of current students who are going to see this video, right? So what's the one bit of advice you would give? And then secondly, one other line. You're all so amazingly successful. What's your greatest source of pride, personal or professional? So Chanel, it's a tough one. You didn't have a chance, but you're on today's show, so you can handle it.
Well, I think
So the one advice and the one greatest source of pride.
so for current students, I would say not to be afraid to really challenge yourself and not look at what person A is doing or what person B is doing and what they're capable of, but what you're really capable of doing. Because when I mentioned the fact that my husband, regretted not taking, some of the English classes and stuff like that, it's because this is a period where you guys know, college, you look back and you're like, oh, I could have squeezed even more out of it, but just challenge yourself in so many ways, like putting tap shoes on a stage, not just in your career path, but just whatever it is you want to do, go ahead and try it. What's the worst thing that could happen? So do it while you're here, and you have the freedom to do it, and the time, and you don't have the bills. And then what was the second one?
The pride. What's the personal greatest source of pride? You said before, like, man, I'm on a Today Show. I have to pinch myself. Is it that? Or
It's actually not. So I have 2 3-year-olds and a 6-year-old. I have 3 kids. And I remember one time I used to go to the National Association of Black Journalists. They have a conference every year, and I've been going to those things since I was at Northwestern. And I remember one time running up to Rahima Ellis. She's at NBC News, and I said, I just want to be just like you, and I want to, and as you can tell, I talk fast, and she's like, slow down. And she said, you know what I want? She's like, I bet you have talent, and I'm sure you're going to be fine. She goes, what I want you to promise me is not to forget to make a life. Don't be so determined to be, on the news one day that you don't just stop and do those things. Do the things that you enjoy. Have a family. Get married. Have children. If you want to go swimming, because we worry about our hair. Those kinds of things. So, not too long ago, we were in the hair and makeup room, and, everybody, especially in the morning, everybody's kind of quiet. And I hadn't actually met her again, in person. And I was like, Rahima, can I just say something? And she's like, sure. I was like, okay, you probably don't remember me, but like 20 years ago, I came up to you, and I was like, whatever. And she goes, did you get married? Did you have your kids? Did you listen to me? And I was like, yes, I did. That is what I'm most proud of. I'm happy that, my career has worked out, and I would not trade Northwestern University for the world. I thank God that, I graduated from Northwestern, but the fact that I have 3 little ones at their grandma's house over in the burbs here in Chicago and is, obviously, you guys know, priceless.
Thank you, Doug. Clap for everybody here. Advice and pride.
Advice, I guess, there's 2 things that I feel were very useful for me. One is just looking in other areas where maybe you're not while you're at Northwestern, that you're not so strong, but you think might be interesting, and if you can kind of get the fire from those areas, whether they're different subjects or they're different activities, like you get to have that for the rest of your life, which I found hugely valuable, whether that's, like I think I go to movies nowadays, and I think I enjoy them a lot more because of some of the things that I pursued while I was at Northwestern. But it's just all over the place, whether that's travel or it's movies or it's people you meet, it just enriches a lot more. And then I guess the second piece of advice is really about just trying to put yourself in a position where each decision you have to make about what job to take, you don't have to choose it based on how much money you're going to get paid. I think some of the best and most impactful decisions I've made were taking jobs that didn't pay as much as other jobs that I was offered, and I think part of the reason I was able to do that was because I made choices about what kind of car I had or where I lived that made that easier for me to do.
And pride?
Pride is just, it's all about the teams that I've been on. I think, I look back and, I was on the water polo team here at Northwestern, and one of my proudest things was that we won the Big Ten championship when we were here, but it's continued, with when I was out in Singapore and we were building our sales team across Asia Pacific, and I look back on that and all those people and how much success they've all had as a team, and whether it's at Microsoft or the startups, I think those have been the most fulfilling things that I'm most proud of.
Mike?
Boy, the advice, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. And Morty, this flows out of something we talked about at our retreat. The trustees in March, we got together, and one of the things I was really dismayed to find was that students considered themselves so stressed out. That really bothered me. That's just the thing that stuck with me most from our March meeting. And I'm gonna be a little bit now like, I don't know, a Vince Lombardi type. I'm not gonna be, pat on the back. Grow up. Grow up while you're here. That's what this is for. This is a transition from men, boyhood to manhood, from being a girl to a young woman or to a woman. Grow up here. Learn how to handle stress. What do you think you're going into? A world where somebody's going to exempt you from stress? I mean, one of the things I'm proudest of, my junior year, talking about GPAs going down, I had to make a choice. GPA was going to go down, and I was going to write for everybody, and I was going to get a great job right out of here. And sports editors back then, this is the one business where nobody cared about GPA. And so I wrote for the Learner newspaper chain on Sunday night, and I would write until 2 a.m., get on the train at Foster, go down to wherever the Learner newspaper office was, get there at 3 a.m., get back on the train, get back to my dorm room at the complex at about 4, and be up for class. And so what? That's what you do. You're supposed to be tested. You're supposed to learn how to navigate and handle stress. And the notion that we need to, as a university community, remove some of the stress from the poor darlings, I'm not for that. Because if you don't learn how to handle it here, where the hell are you going to learn how to handle it? I mean, we're training here for everything. And I think about the people who, were at school before us, they had a lot more stress than I could even imagine. So anyway, that's my really sort of curmudgeonly, old man, get off my lawn, kid, advice, which has nothing to do with any specific academic pursuit. But grow up. Take yourself out of your comfort zones. Force yourself out of your comfort zones. Meet new people. Have dinner with people you wouldn't have dinner with otherwise. Use this wonderful community and grow up. And I guess the thing, I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate professionally. One of the things I'm proudest of is being asked by you to be a trustee of this university, which means a ton to me. So that's one of them. But I guess as a journalist, there's a person I idolized, starting in high school. And his name was David Halberstam. For those of you who are of a certain age and you've read David Halberstam's either books or his incredible reporting of many places, but mostly the New York Times, as far back as from Vietnam. And David Halberstam, to me, wrote with the clearest, most succinct, eloquent voice of anyone I had ever read. And I wanted to be David Halberstam, but you don't ever say that to anybody. So he's a huge sports fan. One night I'm in Madison Square Garden, I'm on Deadline, I'm writing about Michael Jordan and the Knicks, and it's a pretty great night, and I'm on Deadline, and you just, juices are flowing. And there's this voice, and if you ever heard David Halberstam's voice, it was very deep, I can't even affect it. And there's a voice in it that says, "Excuse me, Michael, I know you're on Deadline. I'm David Halberstam." I'm like, oh my God, I know, and now I'm completely thrown off. And he said, "I just want you to know I think you are the best writer at the Washington Post." I was done at that point. I could have, I probably blew Deadline like 4 times. And so David Halberstam and I then became friends. And he said, "I want to invite you, I want to just sit down and talk to you about your writing one day." And I was done. And I thought at that point, everything I learned starting at this place, at Fisk, it validated everything anybody from Richard Haney and everybody told me and drummed into us and made us terrified about. And, it's a moment that I'm going to remember forever, and it's sad that David Halberstam is no longer with us, because he's still my idol when it comes to professional matters.
Christine.
Yes, the advice, I will follow my curmudgeonly friend on the issue of that while we're such a new school world and and old school is out. It's not in some ways. And I tell this to students all the time here and around the country as we all talk to and mentor students, as I mentioned earlier, that the notion of saying thank you and please, an occasional yes ma'am or yes sir, not that you're in the Army, you don't have to salute, but every now and then when you have an informational interview or you have a real interview for a job, whatever it may be journalism, tech, Weinberg, whatever, to our students here, and you're a junior or senior, send a thank you note. And by that I mean an email's fine. Everyone's going to email thanks, but you actually send the note. You have note cards, and whether your name's on them or not, just go buy them somewhere from a stationery store, or drugstore, whatever. Order them online is probably what everyone would do anyway, which is fine. And write the name and double check you spelled the person's name right, and put a date on it. And read it back once or twice just to make sure you haven't made any mistakes, and put it in an envelope, and you put a stamp on it, and you actually take it to the post office or the mailbox, and you drop it in. And what we've all said over the years, this is not a unique thought from those of us of a certain age to the younger generation, but if they are listening or watching this online or going back on the website at some point, is that you will knock the socks off of the person who is receiving that, because you will probably be the only one doing that. And so I just think old school is still very much in vogue in some incredibly important ways that can lead to future success. Being polite and having manners and doing those little things. So that's the piece of advice. And then as far as pride, I agree with Mike, that being asked to be on the board here is just extraordinary. What would 18-year-old us have thought of that? I'm sure many of you do this, right? When you come into campus, like, oh, would 18, 19-year-old me have ever envisioned this life? And we're so lucky up here, but any 5 of you could come up here and tell your stories, and it would be exactly as cool and wonderful. My mom and dad grew up on the south side of Chicago during the Depression and had nothing. My dad, when he and his siblings would come home from school, they would sometimes find their belongings in the front yard. They were being evicted from another apartment and would go live with an aunt and uncle until their mother got enough money together as a stenographer to rent another apartment during the Depression. That's what my mom and dad started with. And my dad, it was an incredible success story. My mom as well as a homemaker, but my dad as a businessman and great leader. They're both gone now. But when I applied to Northwestern, early decision, my mom just early, what was it? Early notification. I don't remember that, but yeah. And we can't remember what we ate for lunch yesterday, but we remember that. And I remember my mom and dad saying, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Absolutely. Medill, journalism, Northwestern." And my dad took me aside after we got the notification that we didn't obviously know each other then, but we're all getting these letters in the mail that we're in. And my dad pulled me aside and said, "I want to tell you something." He said, growing up on the south side, 20 miles from Evanston, he goes, "It was so unreachable to me, Evanston, Northwestern. The thought that someone could go to Northwestern for he and his siblings, for my mom and her siblings, no way. They would have never, ever, they would drive up and see the Christmas lights in Evanston and Wilmette and Winnetka, and then they'd drive back to their small little apartments on the south side as they were kids." So the thought that one of their children, their oldest, I'm the oldest of 4, would be going to Northwestern, that's what I'm the most proud of.
So Dennis, a little advice and a little bit about pride.
Sure. Let me flip that and do pride first. As you get older, you have accomplishments. There are things that you're recognized for. You win awards, and those can be a source of pride. But for me, the source of pride that is my greatest satisfaction is the impact I've had on people. And when I try to help someone and later on I see that it has had an impact because they comment to me that it's had an impact, that's clearly my greatest source of pride. And it comes in part from our children and grandchildren, and in part from other people that I've both worked with and been associated with. So the impact that I've had on people is clearly my greatest source of pride. And that kind of leads me then to advice. And I already said my primary piece of advice, which is reinvent yourself. And just to expand on that a little bit, is there's really 2 elements to it. You need to reinvent yourself constantly throughout your life, both in terms of the world around you and also in terms of the social environment, which is very different. The world around you, the technical world, we have a Tesla car. This morning I got an email telling me that they've just downloaded the software into it to make it driverless, where you don't have to hold the steering wheel. You know, I can go downtown now without holding the steering wheel. Pretty amazing. And so you have to reinvent yourself in what's going on in the technological and the evolving world around you. But more important than that is reinventing your whole mindset about the social mores and customs in the society. And that is the critical thing. And that's what makes the society advance.
So we have time for a couple of questions, and do we have mics for us? So we're going to grab a mic, and then just introduce yourself and direct your question to whomever you want on the panel. So a couple of hands are up. We'll take a couple of questions.
My question is for Michael. So 1 year ahead of me, Mike Greenberg graduated from Medill, and he often talks about how he's different because, similar to your theme, that he's a little bit different because he openly roots for the Jets, and that he's not necessarily a true journalist per se. He's more of a sports commentator. I'm curious, in your years, have you ever had any funny stories or situations where you've been interfacing or socializing or dealing with a true journalist per se, and their sports allegiances have come out in a work or social setting?
They come out all the time. I mean, newsrooms are crazy places. We discuss everything. Everything. I don't know if this is on or not. But yeah, they come out. They're private at that point. They're not in the newspaper. They're not on television. We know everybody's rooting preferences, because you get into this because you love sports. There's a passion involved. It is not to say that political people who are reporters don't love covering politics, not in the same way. Not in the way that you identify with something in a tribal manner. From the time that you're 4 or 5 years old, you learn how to do this thing from listening to games with your grandparent or your parent on the radio. It's not different sort of orientation. So we all know who roots for whom. It's just that Greenberg and now I am in a position where we talk about these things openly. But I don't trust people who don't have a rooting passion. I don't trust people who say, I'm split down the middle. No, you're not. You're lying to cover whatever your emotions are, and that's fine, but I'm not believing that. So again, what you strive to do, particularly early in your career, Greenberg didn't always do that. Mike Greenberg went for 10, 15 years before anybody knew who he rooted for, because he was a reporter. And when you're a reporter, you're not divulging whatever your loyalties are. Nobody cares. Once you become an alleged personality in this business, and people do care and they do identify, and you get paid to bring those biases to work every day. As a columnist, I get paid, Christine gets paid, we are paid to bring our bias to work, which again goes against everything we learned for 4 years at Medill about what you're not supposed to do. Well, then we reinvented ourselves, or someone reinvented us. And so now Greenie gets paid like I do. People want to hear. And even though you divulge what you believe in and what your loyalties are, you still have to have your credibility. You have to maintain that credibility. And so I may dearly love the Chicago Cubs, but if I can't say, God, these guys stunk it out today, if I can't do that, then my credibility is in question, and then it doesn't matter what you say. So there's still a fine line to walk there, whether you're wearing the hat of a journalist or one of the other many hats that seems to have become necessary in recent years.
Another question. Time for another one or two. One over here. In the middle.
Hi, Christine, Dawn Bozeas McCormick, your class. I see Alan over there too. But question, read you for a long time, and a lot of times for years and years and years it was all sports, but now you seem to be more of a crime reporter because of so much of going on in the sports world. And how do you make the determination how many columns you're going to write about athletes gone bad, and how long are you going to pursue it and still be a sports reporter, not a crime reporter?
Well, that's a great question, Dawn. It's great to see you. And we'll have to have the class of 80 picture up here, all of us who've known each other for a million years, and Alan and others as well. For me, it's simply based on the news, and I don't want to make it like I'm brushing off your question, but it's simply about what's happening. So there's not as much thought maybe in this as you would think there is. I usually write Wednesday for Online Wednesday, and then the Thursday newspaper. Which, by the way, it's so funny because everything's online, right? Everything's so important about being online. I'm all about that. You are. We all are. And yet there still are 3 million newspapers that I'm in. That the column is in. That USA Today's 3 million circulation, which is huge. And so even as we're having the funeral for the news business, it's still a very significant, obviously, chunk of readership and a great number, the largest newspaper in the country. But we still focus online. So I just go off the news. And so if Wednesday morning or Tuesday night, for example, last week, Greg Hardy, another part of the domestic violence story, huge piece of that. I won't go into all that, but if you don't know it, you can certainly Google him, watch steam come out of your computer or your iPhone. Anyway, he had a meeting with the media around his locker. And this was the first time he'd spoken since being acquired by the Cowboys. And he missed all of last year except for one game, and then suspended the first 4 games of this year for terrible, terrible acts of domestic violence. The word domestic violence, by the way, is so terrible. The adjective domestic softens the word violence, doesn't it? Maybe we can if you can come up with another word for it. So Greg Hardy has this meeting around his locker. Well, I'm not there. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm not in Dallas. My editor calls me Tuesday night late and says, hey, Hardy had this thing where he was completely uncontrite. Is that a word? He's not contrite. He was just awful, talking about Tom Brady and his wife and what she looks like, and so sexism and no apologies, opposite of what Ray Rice has done, apologizing profusely in his case. We assumed there would be columns overnight. Other columns, the Dallas paper would have columns. Nothing. So I wrote and sent that to editors at 8 in the morning, and it was online by 8:20 or 8:30. And it got retweeted 1,500 times, and it, I think, had over probably close to 1 million page views within 24 hours, which is it's a lot. And that's all because an editor calls me and says, hey, we've got something here. If no one else is pouncing on it, even though it's a national story, it really was a local, Dallas, you would expect they would have done something on it. They had news stories, but no column, no opinion, as Mike was talking about. So I jumped into the void there. So there's really no plan. I'd say seat of the pants is a good way to describe journalism. Journalism, of course, the French word jour, day by day. That's what it is, as you guys know. And so I really live that all these years, 35 years after our class graduated. To me, it's really all about this is happening, jump on it, and get it online as fast as possible. And that's really all there is, the thought process. Other than that, and I would say, though, your point is well taken about culture, and I've written a lot about women's sports and issues about Title IX, and sometimes I go, I'm so sick of being the person out there writing this. And I mean, certainly Mike has written a lot about female athletes when you were at the Post, the Olympics. We've had great arguments about figure skating. Is it a sport or is it not? Oh. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, people. At the Nagano Olympics, we started chatting, and people were like, calm down. We said, no, we want to argue, and they all left the table, and we kept arguing. That's when you've known someone a long time. But in general, if there's an issue and no one else is taking, like Hope Solo, I do not believe she should be playing for the U.S. national team with domestic violence. If we're going to treat men that way, we've got to treat women that way, equal all the way around, right? So I'll do that, but I am aware, to the point that you're asking about, I am very aware of being a one-note song. And enough with that. But then I'll jump in if no one else is on the issues, cultural issues, especially domestic violence. I don't think there could be enough written about it, at least right now, and enough talking about it. And so I'll stay on that. Thanks.
I just want to add that a great example of that, Christine, was when you interviewed Roger Goodell. Remember, they had the NFL football draft here in Chicago, and somebody at Medill got the great idea, maybe it was you, Christine, to convince Roger to come up to campus and be interviewed by you, and then also be very aggressively interviewed by a whole bunch of Medill students. And it was really, it was one of the highlights of the year. And, the questions you asked in the course about domestic violence and about concussions and the like, it was really to see journalism at its best. And a lot of those issues, it was in the context of sports. He was there for the NFL draft. But it was about women, it was misogyny, it was health, it was exploitation, it was race. I mean, it was everything. And if you ever want to remember that, you know, sports really reflects on the great issues of our times, you should have seen a pro in action, Christine Brennan with Roger Goodell, man. That was just an extraordinary experience. So I'm sorry we're out of town. I hope, out of town. I'm sorry we're not out of town. We're here in Evanston. We're out of time. And, but please join me in thanking this extraordinary